In this class we're going to talk about business research and look at some approaches to business research. Business research is used to improve the chance of gaining a competitive advantage and greater market share. So business research has got an objective. The objective is to give the business an insight into the market that perhaps the competitors don't have, and which will therefore enable the business to do better as a consequence. It seeks out facts with the help of study, observation, comparison and experiments. That's what business research does. It looks for the facts of what customers want, what our customer needs, and facts about production and innovation, and facts about the best way to organize the business. It seeks out these through research. It's a search for knowledge through objective and systematic methods, and it's looking for a solution to a problem. The problem is how to grow the business, how to be more successful, and it's looking for knowledge through objective and systematic methods. It's not imposing its will. It's not basing it on supposition or guesswork. It's trying to find out exactly what is going on. What are customer needs? What is meant by innovation in a particular sector, and what are the latest trends in innovation? What are the fashions in the market? It's trying to determine these objectively. So it's trying to answer questions through the application of scientific procedures. By that I mean objective procedures, objective and logical. So scientific in this context means objective and logical. It's trying to find out what the actual situation is, what are the actual customer needs, not the ones that are supposed by people in the business. These are the actual needs of the customers. And these are sought out through systematic methods, through interviews or focus groups. And these are done professionally, done objectively. It's trying to determine the facts. It's trying to determine the truth. And it's trying to determine facts or truth which was not previously known. It's trying to find out the patterns perhaps in the market. What are customers aiming at? What are the customers aiming to achieve? What do the customers want? And perhaps previously the business was only guessing at what the customers wanted. Through the research they're able to determine this precisely. It's attempting to understand the customer. It's attempting to become familiar with the customer. Familiar in the sense that it knows what the customer's needs are, and it's trying to address those needs. And it reports the facts honestly and openly, even if the facts are not what the management want to hear, even if the facts are not complimentary. It still means that they are the facts, and they should be reported honestly and openly and dealt with accordingly. Now let's look at the components of research. Well, first of all, there should be a clear definition of the problems. Exactly what is the problem? Why is research required? So what is the problem? The problem will justify the research. So what is the problem? It enables us to understand the new developments in business and in society and in science. So it's research that helps us to understand the latest trends. It's research that enables us to see what is happening precisely in business or in society or in science. And it does this objectively. It reports the facts openly and honestly. Research is the systematic search for relevant information on a specific topic. It is the careful investigation of a topic through search for new facts. So research is actually looking for what is new. It's looking for explanations of phenomena. Why is it that the customer's taste changed away from this product? What was wrong with the product? Why are customers now demanding different products? Why? What happened? What caused the change? And how can the company best restructure itself to meet that new situation in the market? So it's trying to move from what we know to what we don't know. It's trying to find out what we don't know. It's asking questions about the market which perhaps in the past management guessed the answers. Now it's trying to determine the answers specifically. And it's trying to add to our stock of knowledge. In academic circles, research is very important because it's adding to our knowledge, and that is the function of research in academic circles at universities and at research institutes. In business, it's adding to our stock of knowledge because it's giving us a greater insight into the market, giving us a greater insight into the latest production techniques and the latest way of operating. Now let's talk about the research problem. The research problem is sometimes we don't have a good methodology. A methodology is method. So we need to have a good method of research. And sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we don't have the resources to finance it, or we don't have the know-how to do it. Sometimes respondents, the people we need to participate in the research, the people we're studying, sometimes they're worried about the information they're giving us as researchers. They're worried about that. They're worried about the information could be misused. And confidentiality is a big issue in research. Making the respondents, making the subjects of the research, making them feel comfortable and at ease, and they're willing to participate. And that's an issue. That's a problem in research. Sometimes if the research activity is very big and it's long and it's duplicated and it's complicated, it leads to frustration amongst the respondents, and they give up. They don't want to participate. If it's even a survey on the street, if it's 5 or 6 questions, perhaps the people will say, okay, we will participate. But if you stop someone on the street and say, I've got a survey and I want to ask you 90 questions, the chances are they're going to say no. They were busy. They've got their lives to lead. They don't want to stand on the street for a long time giving answers to questions, and particularly if it's long and a complicated survey. There's no universal code of conduct for researchers. Researchers may adopt different approaches, and because of that, respondents may become confused. Some investigators may be polite and nice, and others may be more direct and to the point, and there's an inconsistency, and probably an understandable inconsistency in terms of working out research, but it does cause confusion sometimes for the respondent. And sometimes research may become frustrated because secondary sources of information, say that come through libraries, it may take a long time to get the information. It may be a slow and long process, and the research is held up because waiting for information, waiting for data coming through libraries or coming through some sort of route, long and tortuous route, and that frustrates the research activity. So these are the research problems. Now let's talk about the objective of business research. Well, it's to determine the relationship between events. Let's say the company cuts the price. What will happen to sales? Will the sales increase or decrease or stay the same? It's trying to determine the relationship. What is the relationship between the price of the product and the sales? It could be to test a hypothesis of a relationship. Is the reduction in price causing extra sales? Or is there some other factor causing the additional sales? What's causing what? It may be that the purpose of the research is to determine market trends. Why do markets change? What's causing it? What leads the market, and so on. And it might also be just simply to try and find out what are the optimal conditions in some aspect of the business. What's the best way of proceeding? Looking at perhaps other companies, how they structure themselves, and looking at different ideas in management. Should it adopt a just-in-time approach for production? Should it just produce when it gets the orders? Should it produce for stock? Looking at what is best. And in order to determine what is the best way of managing and running the business, perhaps research is required. Now the research problem, well, as I said, it's a lack of a good methodology, and it's the issues that we talked about earlier. If I can just go back to those for a second and just put the full list up. The research problem is dealing with all of those points and dealing with them in a way which enables the research to be effective. So the research problem requires answers to these issues. What is a good method? What is the best way of performing the research? How should the respondents' confidentiality issues be addressed, and so on. So good research is trying to deal with all of these issues in a way that enables the research to take place and be effective. There is no point in conducting the research if the respondents are reticent about surrendering information or are not fully participating. Or if there's no point in taking on the research if it's going to take a long time because the data is not coming through, and it's difficult to find secondary data which is relevant or whatever. So the research problem must be addressed before anything effective happens. Now the types of research, well, there is descriptive research. This is used for descriptive studies of phenomena. These studies describe aspects of the business. It's descriptive. It's explaining what the business does. It's making available a description of how the business is being run. It may contrast with what is happening in the business with perhaps what is happening in the wider business community. So it may be in written format based on observations, but it may contrast what happens in the business with what is standard practice elsewhere, as a contrast, for example. Analytical research, well, this is used to analyze and evaluate situations of interest. Analytical means to analyze, but it's analyzing it in the context of some well-known model. What is good? What is good practice? What is not so good practice? So it may analyze market performance and judge the business's market performance to be not so good. But it is normally a comparative study. Not so good compared to what? The business is doing well compared to what? Compared to another business, a similar business, compared to industry standards, compared to the overall performance of the stock exchange, or what's the business compared to. So to do analysis, we really need some benchmark. We need some way of comparing the performance of the business. We also have applied research, which is normally aimed at solving some practical problem. For example, looking at investment in the building industry. That's an applied research issue. Is there sufficient investment in the building industry to meet current housing demand? Is the building industry structured to build and meet the current demand? Is there enough land available, or whatever? It's an applied topic. We also have fundamental research, which is concerned with generalizations about the formulation of a theory. For example, research into the properties of some chemical element. So fundamental research is looking at something very fundamental, very basic and fundamental. What's the property of a certain substance? What's its composition? What's its chemical composition? Or what is the fundamentals of some particular situation? We also have quantitative research, which looks at data. It looks at measuring and recording and analysing data. It uses statistical techniques, perhaps, or mathematical techniques to make sense of data. But also we have attitudinal search. Sometimes we're interested in the attitudes of people. We're interested in their opinions on a particular subject. So we might conduct research and ask them how they feel about the present economic policy of the government, or about the present situation in political terms or in social terms for what's happening in the world. It's an attitude. It's looking at the people's attitudes. And related to that, of course, we have qualitative research, which collects data by making observations, perhaps, or by looser forms of data collection, looking for people's opinions again, looking for what underlies the motivations of individuals. Why do they act as they do? Rather than just simply saying people act in a certain way, looking for the reasons why it happens. We also have motivational research. This is an approach to discover what underlies the motives and desires, and may use in-depth interviews. So what is it that motivates people to act in certain ways or behave in certain ways, perhaps in the context of the market? It's a qualitative approach to research. For example, it may be used to determine customer motivation. Why do customers act in a certain way? And the methodology in this case would be based on psychology. Clearly, looking at motivation suggests the underlying theories and structure will be based in psychology. It might be, for example, conducted in the context of word association tests, or sentence completion tests, or story completion tests, perhaps giving the respondent a story, a scenario, and asking them to complete it. What's the end? Asking them how would such a story end? Or giving them a sentence and asking them to complete the sentence. And in this way you gain an insight into their motivation, into their character. There's also empirical research. Empirical means done by experiment, but we mean the word, nowadays we look at the word in terms of modern meaning as done practically. So it's practical research. with a practical bias. So it's not experiment in the true sense, but we call it empirical practical. It relies on experience or observation. It's a data-based research, coming up with conclusions which are capable of being verified by observation or by experiment. It's empirical. It's done by observation or by experiment. So it's looking at data and trying to analyze the data to try and find patterns. Its approach is straightforward. Get the data source and analyze it to derive some research outcome. So it's quite a straightforward methodology. Get the data and analyze it. See what comes out. The methodology is as follows. The researcher must use a working hypothesis or guess as to the probable results. So the researcher suggests that A depends on B. Something depends on something else. That could be the working hypothesis. And then collects the data to see if the hypothesis is correct. Does the data bear out the hypothesis? Does it support the hypothesis or does it reject the hypothesis? There's also descriptive research, or what's known as ex post facto research. This is an attempt to discover causes even when the variables cannot be controlled. So sometimes we can't control variables. We can't manipulate the experiments to find out the true relationships that are behind the figures. Sometimes we just have to take what is there. And we're at the same time trying to work out what are the patterns, what's causing what. Its main purpose is to explain current events and observations. So it's trying to work out what is happening perhaps in the market right now. We can't sometimes control the variables in the market. We can't control customers, and we can't control retailers, and we can't control government influence, and we can't control health warnings, and there's so many issues that can't be controlled that may impact on the market. But despite that, we try to find out what are the underlying trends, what are the underlying patterns. The researcher can only report what is happening. There's no control over the variables, but the researcher tries to make sense of what is happening. We also have what's known as longitudinal research. Now, longitudinal research is related to time. It's carried over several time periods. So longitudinal tends to be a long-run piece of research. We have also clinical or diagnostic research. It follows a case study methodology or in-depth approaches to reach the basic causal relations. So it looks at case studies, and out of the case studies it tries to understand what's causing what. And that's known as diagnostic research. It looks at the case study and tries to make sense of it. Studies go deep into the causes of events and uses very small samples and deep probing data gathering devices. So diagnostic research could be looking at one or two situations and trying to understand these relationships, the relationships in the studies very deeply, and out of that get a picture. Then it goes on to, of course, try to generalize, which may or may not be the correct procedure. It depends. Sometimes there is no choice but to generalize from very few, particularly in areas like medicine, where it is not ethical to perform experiments on patients. So they take the information, whatever information they've got about patients, and try to make sense of it, and then apply that in similar situations when they arise. Exploratory research, well, as the name suggests, it's aiming at exploring a research field. It tries to develop hypotheses from previous research and from observations. So it makes observations and it develops hypotheses. It's not focused on testing or analysis. So it's trying to explore situations. It's trying to explore relationships and trying to make sense of the relationships that it sees. Formalized research. Well, this form of research attempts to study data in a structured and precise fashion. It's very formalized. So it tries to be very strict about how the data is structured and the methods it uses for its analysis. It tests the hypothesis and draws logical outcomes. It's formalized. It's very strict. There's also historical research. This uses old sources of information such as legal documents and old media reports, perhaps old newspapers, or records in churches or in records in the community. So it tries to look at old sources of information to try and work out what was happening in the past. So historical research is it's a well-established one amongst obviously historians and social scientists and people interested in the development of perhaps current patterns in society. There's also target-oriented research. This is a flexible approach. The researcher selects the area of study and may change the focus throughout the work. So it's looking at a particular aspect, perhaps an aspect of the market or an aspect of society, and later on the researcher, because it gets a lead on some aspect, so something happens within the research to suggest something else is important, it moves the focus of the research from where it was into something else. So let's say, for example, in business, the business interested find out the relationship between changes in prices and changes in sales. And whilst it's looking at that, it finds out that sales are also heavily influenced by changes in income. So the focus moves to look at the relationship between income in the local area and sales in that area. It changes. There's also decision-oriented research. This type of research aims to provide relevant information for the decision maker. Well, it's a title, but in fact a lot of research is aimed at improving information for the decision maker. So as to whether it's justified in having a separate heading is debatable. Operations research, well, this is a scientific approach to the analysis of data and processes in business. Examples of some of the techniques include queuing, linear programming and stock control. It provides information for effective decision making. Operations research is really a collection of tools that the business person may reach to. These are, generally speaking, mathematical tools, algorithms for programs, solutions to problems. As I said, they include issues like what's the best queuing arrangement for selling the product in retail outlets. Banks may have different channels. When a customer goes to a bank, forms a particular queue. It might be a multi-point, many cashiers and one single channel. Or it might be many channels, each one going to a particular cashier. There's linear programming and stock control, and there are several techniques that are available in helping the business person make better decisions. I think that's probably all we need to deal with in the context of the different types of research. If you go online and look at types of research, you'll find many listed in many different sites, discuss different types of research. I think the list we've got here is more than adequate. I think the important bit to remember is the purpose of the research, which is to help decision making, to give a greater insight into what's happening, in the case of business research, what's happening in the market. And then there are the various types of research that may be conducted and have some insight into what they are about. And that's all we need to get out of this particular session. So I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.